Welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Dr. Mark Hitchcock, and this is a program that we do every week that where we want to talk about current events in our world today and how they relate to what the Bible says about the end times and biblical prophecy. And right now I'm seated in a hotel in Herzliya in Israel. Herzliya is just a little bit north of Tel Aviv. It's named after Theodore Herzl, who's the founder of the modern Zionist movement. And here in our hotel, my wife Cheryl and I are leading 102 people on a tour. I'm here in the land of Israel. So I thought I would bring Marking the End Times this week from here in the land of Israel. And what I want to talk about today is something that's happening in Israel right now, the Feast of Purim. Maybe you've heard of that from the book of Esther. I'll talk a little bit about that, what it is, and how the Feast of Purim, really in the events of Purim, are kind of being mirrored today. What we see in the nation of Iran and what's happening there between Israel and Iran. So I want to talk about that, and then we'll go a little bit later to the subscriber-only section, and there's a question there about the Illuminati and the New World Order, and a question about that, and also another question about the recent events in Asbury Seminary and the revival there, and if that's kind of maybe a precursor to a great end time revival. So we'll talk about that during the subscriber section. But I want to talk today about the Feast of Purim as it relates to what we see happening in our world today. Right now in Israel, my wife and I are here, and they're celebrating the Feast of Purim. It's a kind of a one day, but it bleeds over into 2-day holiday and feast that's celebrated in Israel every year. On the Jewish calendar, it's the month of Adar. So it's the 14th and 15th days of Adar. Now, it kind of goes on really for several days after that. It's kind of been extended. But the Feast of Purim is not one of the biblical feasts in the sense that God gave the Jewish people 7 feasts to celebrate back in the book of Leviticus. But later on in the 6th century, the 5th century, this was added to the Jewish calendar, to the Feast of Purim, in the days of Esther. Later on, there's another feast that's added, which is the Feast of Hanukkah, or Feast of Lights, added in the 2nd century BC. But the Feast of Purim revolves around the story of Esther and the Persian Empire. Remember that Esther was married to a Persian king named Xerxes. And Xerxes didn't know that Esther was Jewish, and that was hidden from him. Well, there's an uncle to Esther named Mordecai. And Mordecai, there's an advisor to King Xerxes named Haman, and he hates Mordecai. And he hates him so much that he gets the king, King Xerxes, to sign an edict to wipe out all the Jewish people on a certain day. Well, of course, King Xerxes doesn't know that his own wife, his beloved wife, Esther, is Jewish. So he's manipulated into signing this by Haman. Well, through this story, what God does is God, through his providence, turns the tables, and Haman has built a gallows for Mordecai to be hanged, and at the end of the story, Haman and his sons are hanged on that same gallows. So it's an incredible story of the turning of the tables and how God brought that about. And basically the story of Esther is a story about God's preservation of the Jewish people. God had made a promise all the way back to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, that God would, he made promises that he'd give the Jewish people a land, that they would have many descendants, that he'd bring great blessing to them. And there's still many of those prophecies yet to be fulfilled. So it's really a story about God's covenant faithfulness to protect the Jewish people, even when primarily they were being unfaithful to the Lord, to protect them as a people. So during the Feast of Purim, one of the things that happens is the Jewish people dress up in costumes. And so we've been here in Israel the last 3 days, my wife and I, and Purim's been going on, and people are dressed up everywhere in costumes. And sometimes people will say, well, why do they dress up? Well, one of the reasons for that that's often given is that Esther's identity as a Hebrew person, as someone who was of the Jewish race, was disguised from King Xerxes. So many people think, well, her identity was disguised, so people put on disguises. Other people believe that as you go through the book of Esther, God is at work, but God's work is always behind the scenes. The name of God never appears in the book of Esther. God's clearly at work, but he's at work behind what we can see. So others will say, well, God is kind of disguised in the book. So they wear these disguises. Others will say, the time of Purim is a time of generosity and giving gifts. and so that people wear disguises so that someone who's poor won't feel embarrassed to ask for money, because if they have on a disguise, no one will know who they are. We don't know really the exact reason, but they wear these disguises during this time. But again, this is this time period back when the Jewish people were under the rule of the Persians. Remember, they'd been taken into captivity by the Babylonians. The Babylonians were overtaken by the Persians, and many of the Jews had already gone back to the land of Israel, but many had stayed in Babylon and Persia. And so these are the Jews that are being dominated at this time by the Persian Empire. But it's the great story of deliverance, the deliverance of God's people, how he came on their behalf to deliver them from really certain death at the hands of the Persian Empire. Well, the reason I say all of that is we're here in Israel, Purim's being celebrated, and just this last week, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, made a reference to Purim and Iran. Because back during the time of Purim, the great empire was the Persian Empire. Well, today, obviously, Persia is modern-day Iran. And just as the Persian Empire back at the time of the Feast of Purim was threatening to destroy the Jewish people, today Iran is threatening to do the very same thing. And many of you probably have seen in the news that Iran now is right on the cusp or the precipice of having a nuclear weapon. In fact, they're at the threshold, farther than they've ever been. We know that because the International Atomic Energy Agency said this week that Iran now has uranium enriched to 84%. Now, they claim in Iran they haven't enriched it beyond 60%, but they found that they're at 84%, and highly enriched uranium at 90% is what's needed, they consider today, to make a nuclear weapon. Now, we have to remember the uranium for the bomb that was dropped during World War II at Hiroshima was only 80%. So they're already beyond that. And I've read recently that in 12 days, they can have enough highly enriched uranium to make a nuclear weapon. So, if it's 12 days away, then basically they're already there. And they may be there as well. They may have it at 90% already, and it's just not known. So Iran has enough highly enriched uranium to make a nuclear weapon. They've threatened to wipe out the Jewish people. But what happened this last week is the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency came out and said that for the Jewish people to strike Iran and to strike these nuclear facilities would be illegal. He's come out and said that. And so Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has responded to that. And here's what he said. This is from an article online. It says, Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, sharply criticized remarks by the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, who suggested Saturday that a potential Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities would be illegal. That's what this leader is saying. So speaking at Sunday's cabinet meeting, as Israelis prepared to celebrate Monday and Tuesday's Purim holiday, again, which is going on right now as I speak, Netanyahu compared Israel's defense against Iran today to the story of Esther in the Bible, when she convinced the Persian king to reverse an edict that called for all Jews to die. And here's what Benjamin Netanyahu said, the Israeli prime minister. 2,500 years ago, an enemy arose in Persia who sought to destroy the Jews. They did not succeed then, neither will they succeed today. And then he went on and asked this, is Iran, which openly calls for our destruction, permitted to defend the destructive weapons that would slaughter us? Are we permitted to defend ourselves? It is clear that we are, and it is clear that we will do so. So it's kind of, again, we've kind of come full circle. It's back again to this Persian Empire that wants to wipe out the Jewish people. We're here at Purim, and Benjamin Netanyahu is using this and saying it's the same today. And just as the Jewish people defended themselves in the time of Purim and God brought a great deliverance, the same thing will happen now. And with Iran being where they are with their nuclear capability, Israel has said repeatedly, and especially Prime Minister Netanyahu, we're not going to allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. Now that's true. Since that's true, and it is true, then obviously with Iran being at the threshold, Israel is ready to strike. And if Israel does strike against these nuclear facilities, several things will happen, maybe a lot more, but Iran will unleash their surrogates, Hezbollah and Hamas and these terrorist groups around Israel. Iran themselves may shoot missiles into Israel. They've threatened to level Tel Aviv. But we do know that if Israel does hit those nuclear facilities, that's going to really create seeds of hatred and revenge in Iran, probably unlike anything that's ever existed. And that could easily be the seeds that are sown there that later then will cause Iran and Russia to join together this Gog-Magog invasion in Ezekiel 38 and invade the land of Israel. So what we see happening today is the beginning of that. And again, when Gog-Magog occurs in Ezekiel 38 and 39, God is going to rescue the Jewish people again when you read those chapters, miraculously, just like he did back in the days of Esther and the days of Purim. But what we're seeing today, again, is a reflection of that. It's an echo of that, and it's a foreshadow of what's coming in the future. But God's going to bring a great deliverance of his people from modern-day Persia, Iran, sometime in the future in that invasion of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Well, thank you so much for watching. We're going to go now into the subscriber-only section, where I'm going to answer a question about the Illuminati, about the New World Order, and also just a question about this revival that's taking place at Asbury in Kentucky. And does that have end-time implications? So as always, again, thank you for joining us. And we're going to go now to the subscriber-only section. Well, as always, we want to thank you for being a subscriber, and thank you for sending in such good questions. Here's a couple of questions for this week I want to answer. What are your thoughts on the Asbury revival and others that are breaking out at universities around the country? Could this be the end times revival that people talk about in the Bible? Well, several things about this. Whenever I hear about something like this, a revival like this, I always want to be optimistic. Some people that I know, I already know what their response will be. Some people, when something like this happens, are going to always, think it's of God, kind of no matter what. And there's other people that are going to kind of always be very negative and think it's not of God, kind of no matter what. So, I think when we're kind of hearing someone's analysis of this, we want to kind of look at people sometimes, because a lot of people look at these things from different angles, different perspectives. But I think ultimately with something like these revivals that are taking place, and again, that's not really a Bible word. It's just a word that has come about in our language of a revival. I don't know if there's really a clear definition of what that means, but what I always will look at is the fruit of it. Obviously, a good tree is known by its good fruit. A bad tree is known by bad fruit, and so we'll see what the fruit of it is. I think sometimes maybe it takes a little bit of time to know, whether something has really been of God and how far-reaching it really will be. But the things I've heard so far about it have been encouraging to me. They've kind of shunned the idea of letting a lot of celebrities come in and kind of take it over, which I think is very good and very something to be applauded on their part. I've heard some of them say, the only celebrity we want is Jesus, and that's good. We want him to be front and center of all that takes place. And some of the other things I've heard of how they've guarded what's happening there, I think are very, very good and show a lot of wisdom. But ultimately, it's going to be something that we'll see the fruit of it. In the days ahead. I saw the movie The Jesus Revolution. I'm sure many of you have seen that. It's about the story of the Calvary Chapel movement and the life of Greg Laurie. And I thought the movie was great. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend it. There was a real awakening, a real revolution that took place kind of between 1969, 1972 on the West Coast, and really kind of swept across the nation. And we see the fruit of that, of all the salvations that came about and young people whose lives were changed, and the whole Calvary Chapel movement that exploded across the country of those churches. So, we've seen the fruit of that, and it's good fruit that God produced. Now, when someone asks, well, how does this relate to the end times revival? There are a lot of people you'll hear talk about there's going to be a great revival in the end times. When we say that, I think we have to be careful to distinguish between what's going to happen before the rapture and what's going to happen after the rapture of the church. My view would be that we live in the church age today. And the church age, the Bible tells us, I believe, that as we go along through this church age, that there's going to be greater and greater apostasy and turning away from the Lord. And I see that in places like in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 1, it says, but the Spirit expressly says that in the last days, many will fall away from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of demons. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, it says that as this age progresses, that evil men and seducers will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. Remember that the last book in the New Testament before the book of Revelation is a little 25-verse book of Jude, which is all about apostasy and false teaching. And I think really the book of Jude in many ways is kind of like the foyer or kind of the entryway into the book of Revelation, showing us what conditions will be like when the very end arrives and the rapture takes place. So there may be a revival, a great revival, before the rapture takes place, but all I would say is it's simply not prophesied in Scripture. I don't see it prophesied anywhere. Now, I do believe after the rapture takes place, there will be a great revival that will occur during the time of the tribulation period. And I believe that the rapture itself may be one of the greatest evangelistic tools in history. Think about, people all over the world are going to disappear in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. And think about all the people who've heard about the rapture and been told about this. These people are going to be left behind. And for many of them, I think there's going to be an awakening in them that I've been left behind. And they're going to see the events of the tribulation begin to unfold. So I think many people will come to faith in Jesus Christ really in the wake of the rapture. But we know that there's going to be great revival, a great awakening during the time of the tribulation period, because in Revelation chapter 7, we read there about a group of people who are clothed in white. Their garments are dipped in blood. And it says, these are those who've come out of great tribulation. They're believers. They're in heaven. And it says the number of them is so many that you couldn't even count them. So after the rapture takes place, there's going to be a tremendous revival during the tribulation period. Now, there's also going to be a great apostasy that's going to take place. So the lines between the saved and lost are going to be cleared during that period of time. Now, the mistake I think a lot of people make is they take these prophecies about during the tribulation, the great revival then, and they put those prophecies kind of back before the rapture. Like before the time of the rapture of the church. So again, there may be a great revival before the rapture takes place, but if there is one, it's not prophesied. But we know there will be after the rapture during the time of the tribulation period when that's poured out upon the earth. There's also the passage in Matthew 24, verse 14, says this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world, and then the end will come. Again, I think that's talking about after the rapture. The word of God, that the gospel is going to go to the whole world during the tribulation. They're going to be the ministry of the two witnesses, the 144,000. In chapter 14 of Revelation, an angel is going to fly across the mid-heaven and is going to proclaim the eternal gospel. So I hope that's helpful about this idea about revival. We need to pray that God will bring revival, that He'll save as many people as can be saved before the rapture. We don't want to be negative and kind of throw up our hands as if it's all over. God can do what He wants to do. We need to pray that He does send another Jesus revolution to our country and to this world before the rapture. But again, I don't think that's prophesied. The next question is about the Illuminati. It's about the Illuminati and says, do you believe in the Illuminati or the New World Order? Are these part of Bible prophecy? Well, when you get online and look up the Illuminati and New World Order, people's opinions are all over the place. There's people that believe the Illuminati, which, by the way, the Illuminati started in Bavaria in Germany back in 1776. A lot of people believe, many of the founders of our country were members of the Illuminati and New World Order, and some of the symbols on our money, on our paper money, the triangle with the seeing eye, that those are symbols of the Illuminati. There's all kinds of theories out there about that, and I'm not sure that someone can really prove today, that all the people that are members of the Illuminati. But let me say this: I believe that Satan is the master globalist. And whether it's the Illuminati, the New World Order, through working just through government leaders, Satan's goal is to bring the whole world under the rule of one man. That's what he's trying to do. And he's going to use every means possible to make that happen. Now, President Biden here not long ago referred to the war in Ukraine and Russia, that war was going to bring about a new world order. So we hear that term thrown around a lot. But Satan is the ultimate one that wants to bring a new world order. Remember, Satan's the master globalist. After the flood, he had the whole world together at the Tower of Babel. And it was all ruled over by one man, a man named Nimrod. And God came down and scattered people all over the earth and confounded the languages. And ever since that time, we've gone in the world from tribalism to nationalism, now back to globalism. And Satan, the master globalist, has been working throughout history to get everything back in the world, back to Babel again, back to rule under the rule of one man. And isn't it interesting? Two of the last chapters in the Bible, two of the last few chapters, Revelation 17 and 18, are about Babylon. So it's like everything comes full circle from Babel, the Tower of Babel, to Babylon, where the Antichrist reigns, rules over the world. So Satan is the master globalist. He'll use the Illuminati, the New World Order. He'll use things like COVID, all the technology that's available today, artificial intelligence, everything that's out there, all that he can to create, I think, in the beginning, a one world economy. That one world economy then will morph into a one world government. And of course, the Antichrist is going to take that over, and he's going to rule the world. So, I don't personally think a lot about Illuminati, New World Order, all those organizations. I think about Satan, who's the master globalist, who's using all of these things, anything he can use to carry out his plan, to ultimately bring his man, the Antichrist, onto the world scene to rule the world. That's where it's all headed. And we can see that today happening really right before our eyes in our world. Well, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for subscribing. And again, thank you for joining us here from Israel. You can see the Mediterranean there in the background. And I pray that the program today has been a blessing to you. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. God bless you.